I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today I'm talking again about Yuval Noah Harari, because the question keeps coming up of whether Russell Brand in his interviews and his affection for Yuval has been fooled by him or whether he's complicit. I think that that's neither of the above. In looking at my old response episodes to those interviews, I see where Yuval makes a lot of very good points and makes a lot of sense in a way that I think we have to pay attention to, because he's providing the rationale for something that, taken in context, is a very dangerous thing. So I'm going to be responding to Yuval on his face value and answering the points that he makes and putting those in a different context. I listened to a new interview of Yuval by Daniel Soylesisi, and in that, Yuval talks about how, as a historian, his job is to broaden the horizon of possibilities. So I'm going to be doing that too. I'm going to be looking at the possibility that he's raising of this meta-wealth universe, a global world order in which technology and the rich who have access to that technology are ruling over the rest of us. And then what Russell and I stand for, which is a network of commonwealths, small-scale sovereign communities who are interconnected and who are working with one another. Let's look at this. I found this interview on Dr. Joseph Mercola's website in an article where he talks about opioids and the conspiracy that he sees behind that. I'm going to be doing another episode on that issue because I think it's really important. But that was looking at Yuval and put this in the context of saying, is the opioid conspiracy part of the Great Reset? Is this part of how to deal with these useless, worthless people? Is it part of this eugenics movement? So it's fitting that the first thing that Yuval talks about in this interview is medicine, and how medicine is becoming something that, instead of looking at healing the body, is looking at upgrading health and upgrading the body. And that's something that can only be done by technology and is very expensive. And so that's widening the gap between the rich and the poor, because the poor are going to be resentful of all of these things that the rich can now do to so much enhance their health and extend their lives that they may not die at all. So this is something also that Dr. Joseph Mercola talks about. We're all about upgrading health rather than using medicine as a way of intervening. That instead, what Mercola and the entire homeopathic movement is about is saying the body knows how to heal itself. What we need to do are figuring out the things that are getting in its way, that are interfering with its own ability to heal, and then do these things that enhance it, that work with the body and with its natural genius. So I think that we're both wanting the same thing, but he's looking at it from a techno-fix perspective, and we're looking at it as something in which nature has already provided the solution. Yuval then talks about how the age of the masses is over, that at one time people were useful as soldiers or as workers, but now they're already superfluous in the military. All you need is someone who can push a button and who knows how the technology works. You don't actually need them to go into battle. And the same thing, he says, is happening with workers, that they are now useless, worthless, superfluous, meaningless. These are not my words. These are the words that he's using. And what's going to happen when all those people are facing boredom? He says that the answer is drugs and computer games, and that that's already happening in places like Japan, where someone may have a virtual spouse. Daniel then says, but people have lived to work and worked to live. Without that, won't there be strife and conflict between the people who are superfluous and the people who aren't? And Yuval answers that when you are superfluous, you have no power. That in history there have been peasant revolts that never amounted to anything because those people didn't have power. In recent years, people had the power of their labor as workers and soldiers. And so some of those revolts have worked. But in the future, the people, the masses, won't stand a chance. Let's unpack this. The burning question is, useless to who? Superfluous to who? In my last episode, I go through chapter 2 of my book, in which I look at the origins of money and how it was created as a machine for conquest, something that co-opted people into conquering their neighbors and turning them into slaves. And so slaves have to be made by ripping a person from their context. That's how you turn a person into a tradable commodity. Within their community, they are irreplaceable. They're not interchangeable. They have a unique set of relationships to which they cannot be taken without there being a gap in that community. So they're not something that can be traded. In this case, what he's saying is that people will no longer be useful as workers to make the rich richer. They won't need that. And therefore, they'll have no purpose in their lives. How insulting is that? The idea that our only purpose in life right now is to work to live and to live to work. And without that purpose, we're going to be so bored we'll turn to drugs and computer games. In the first place, I think that they completely overestimate how much manual labor has been made unnecessary in our lives. There is so much manual labor that goes in that we don't recognize. And I think that reckoning is coming soon because that work is being done by disposable people in producer countries. And the way that we have created these economic sanctions against Russia is creating an alliance between the producer countries where they're no longer going to be our disposable labor and our disposable resources and a source of all that goods, energy, and food that has been cheap for us. So we're going to have to come to terms with that. And at the same time, look at how now that we all have become disposable people, who do we want to side with? Do we want to side with them or do we want to side with the elites? Yuval then talks about the collapse of the family and the intimate community. He says throughout history for the last 10,000 years, people have lived within communities of about 200. Where they knew everyone. That community was their school, their police, their health care, their government, their food providers, everything. Over the last 200 years, Yuval says, those family and intimate community networks have been replaced by new systems of the state and the market. So you don't need to have children. You have a pension. You don't need sisters and brothers because if you're sick, the state will provide for you. Everything that you need now is taken care of without having those connections. And so he says, maybe we are worse off than we were in the 1700s when we had a large network of family around us And now we've lost those connections. We may see our scattered family once or twice a year at most, but we are not surrounded the way we were before by relationships. So, in terms of our happiness, that's been a trade off, but it happened. And lo and behold, people are very malleable and adaptable. And so we've managed to survive even in our isolated and alienated lives. These are his words, not mine. And the last thing that Yuval talks about is agriculture and how people say that agriculture actually made our lives much harder, that when we were hunter-gatherers, we had a much more healthy lifestyle and it was much less work because the food was already there. And then agriculture made it where we had to do a lot more labor to produce it, and we were working for other people rather than being able to control our own lives. So he says that food in the future is not going to be a problem. So it's only things like boredom that are going to be an issue, because being able to feed all of these useless, superfluous, worthless people is not really the issue. So I have to ask the question, is it possible that Yuval is a truth double agent? I've talked about how I think that Trump was a propaganda double agent, someone who said things that were so offensive mixed in with the truth that it drove liberals to reject everything, including the truth, so that it was an intentional way of setting us up for the Great Reset. I think that Yuval is presenting to us the Great Reset in a way that is so repugnant that it is driving us to be unified in the other direction, and that he's giving us all of the solutions. He's telling us, you want to go back to controlling your own food sources. You need family and intimate community around the level of 200 people. You need to be controlling your own medicine and upgrading the health of your body in a way that is aligned with nature. He's telling us we need to have our own purposes for our labor, that right now our labor is serving the rich. And not only is that a worthless thing for us to be doing with our lives, but they also are looking at us as utterly disposable. So we need to take back our labor into serving the community. And Yuval is also showing clearly where our true alliances lie with all those other disposable people that right now are generating our food, our energy, and our goods. Our alliances need to be with them, and they are the ones that we need to learn from as we go through our own great reset, where we reset our expectations that life is work, and work doesn't mean wiggling your phalanges over a keyboard. It means working with the land and learning how to do things for ourselves again. But for those who do want to side with the elites and be a part of this technology future where there's no work involved and food appears out of labs and there's no real reason for you to do anything but drugs and computer games as you figure out how to deal with this life of leisure, I have a suggestion. If both people and land is superfluous to this group of oligarchic elites, what do they need to rule the world for? They don't need the world at all. All they need is a little corner of it to put their little food labs and have all those people who want to be their servants and not engage in manual labor. And they can push their buttons and wage wars on each other, because what's the point of ruling us when they have no use for us and no use for the land? So the big question now is, what corner of the world do they get? Certainly not Israel. Israel belongs to the Palestinians. I believe in a one-state solution, and that one state is Palestine. But I also don't agree with Yuval, who says that the Middle East is just a speed bump and it doesn't even matter, that Silicon Valley is where it's at and that's all that matters now. I'm not ready to give them Silicon Valley because I live in the closest beach town to Silicon Valley and I don't want them taking over my space. But maybe for their Metawealth Miniverse, they don't need land at all. They could just go on one of Elon Musk's cockrockets, as Russell calls them, and they could have their own space station. And there they can have virtual images of all of the ocean and everything that they would want to have here, and then they can live in a world where they don't have to worry about dying, because that's been shown now that they can just continue on virtually, and they can have virtual spouses or virtual hookers, which is probably a little more their style. I think this would be a lovely solution for all of us. So if you want to help create this world, look at the story of money, which is not getting as much exposure as the sensationalized videos that I put on. Do your homework, people. We need to get serious about this. And I suggest looking at my Substack Third Paradigm, because there I've posted the introduction to my book, How to Dismantle an Empire, in a post called In the Beginning Was the Purpose. Thank you.